Welcome to Plastisphere, the podcast on plastics, people, the planet, and politics. My name is Anja Krieger. On the way to the final round of negotiations towards the Global Plastics Treaty, things are moving fast now. And there's a major development on the road to Busan, something that could change everything. Ambassador Luis Vayas, the chair of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, made a move that could help the treaty text break free from all the brackets to get the process back on track. Magnus Løvold from the Norwegian Academy of International Law just published the details on his blog, Points of Order. And one of his first readers was Rebecca Altman, an environmental sociologist from the US who's currently writing her first book on plastics. We both agreed that this is too insightful not to share it with you. So Rebecca went into the studio at Brown University and recorded the audio version of Magnus' blog post. Here it is, a basic proposal.
Observers had not been invited, so no one could independently verify what had transpired during the closed-door meetings of the heads of delegations to the plastics treaty negotiations, held in Nairobi earlier this week. But as reports from the two-day meeting emerged through the grapevines on Tuesday night, it became clear that something important had happened. Ambassador Luis Vayas of Ecuador, chair of the negotiation committee, reportedly stared down fierce opposition from Russia and defended his plan for how an effective treaty on plastic pollution can be achieved by the end of 2024. In a bold move that may, when history is written, become the most significant turning point in the entire negotiation process, Vayas committed to drafting a new treaty proposal ahead of the final round of talks in Busan in November, under his own authority. If true, the game of the plastics treaty negotiation has fundamentally changed. For the first time since the UN Environment Assembly launched treaty negotiations to end plastic pollution in March 2022, the kind of leadership and strategic vision needed to achieve this goal is finally, and not a moment too soon, emerging. Despite repeated calls from Africa, Latin America, Europe, and other regions for a strong treaty with international rules to tackle the ballooning plastics crisis, it was hard until recently to shake the feeling that the plastics treaty negotiations were slowly but inevitably sinking into quicksand. Every effort made to rally support for a cohesive set of rules only dragged, it seemed, the process deeper into a gooey mud of technical and legal detail. The draft text from the fourth round in Ottawa in April could have killed the vibe of even the most buoyant negotiator. A monstrous Frankenstein compilation of 77 near-illegible pages of text options, sub-options, alternatives, and sub-alternatives, all patched up by more than 3,000 square brackets. Reading through it or attempting to made Finnegan's Wake feel like the Hardy Boys by comparison. The idea that a clean treaty text could emerge from these omni-shambles during the 7 remaining days of formal negotiations in Busan would have been laughable if the consequences hadn't been so dire. Apart from the well-known harm caused by the millions of tons of plastics flooding our oceans and coastlines, plastic pollution is fast becoming a major public health concern. Each month, it seems, a new study proves the presence of plastics in yet another part of the human body. The bloodstream, breast milk, placental tissue, the lungs, and the brain are all demonstrably infested. Eerily, plastics are now even restoring pollution to its original 14th century meaning. A Chinese study released in August detected potentially alarming levels of plastic particles in human semen. The sorry state of the text outcomes from Ottawa left optimists in a quandary. How on earth, many wondered, could anything remotely meaningful emerge from these wretched brackets? It was difficult to avoid the conclusion that the international community would, yet again, fail to protect people and nature from an increasingly urgent environmental threat. Recognizing the problem, several actors started to talk about the need to extend the negotiation process beyond its 2024 deadline. But Vayas took a different tack. Rather than asking for more time, he decided to take full advantage of the mounting time pressure and channel the broad support for a strong treaty into a different, more focused negotiation process. Early signs that something new was being put into motion began to appear a few weeks ago. On September 5th, Vayas circulated a non-paper to all countries, introduced as the chair's, quote, initial thoughts on elements to achieve an effective treaty in Busan. His message was clear. The bracket-written text from Ottawa is a dead end. Quote, we will not achieve our goal in Busan if we are to work incrementally on the basis of that text, he wrote. Other than that, the paper included little more than what some negotiators called, quote, essentially a table of contents for the new treaty. Then, after an online heads of delegations meeting on September 16th, Vayas circulated a revised, longer paper outlining a set of, quote, substantive proposals for the next steps in the negotiations. This document, which has been all the rage among negotiators over the past week, offered a broad outline of the possible content of each treaty article. To be clear, Ambassador Vayas's non-paper in no way constitutes a radical departure from the proposals that have been made throughout the past 2 years of negotiations. The structure of the treaty largely mirrors the draft text from the Ottawa talks, based on the notion that the treaty must regulate plastics along their full life cycle. What Vayas appears to be in the business of doing is injecting a much-needed sense of focus and prioritization into the negotiations. Instead of the everything everywhere all at once approach that pulled the committee into its current bracketed mess, Vayas called for a hard delineation between the elements that must be settled in Busan to make the treaty fully operational and those that can be worked out later. Crucially, Vayas's paper suggests that the types of plastic products that carry the greatest environmental risk should be the treaty's main objects of regulation. Urging negotiators to, quote, be open to accepting a more focused treaty, the paper foregrounds the possible rules and regulations that could be adopted to prohibit or reduce, quote, plastic products and chemicals of concern as used in plastic products. The biggest question in the months leading up to the Busan talks is whether countries will accept or reject the third iteration of Vayas's paper, expected to be circulated in early November. In any prioritization exercise, some elements will necessarily receive less attention or be assigned less urgency, which could leave certain countries and stakeholders feeling sidelined. For example, while supporters of the Bridge to Busan, a declaration pushed by a group of countries in Ottawa, were likely pleased to see their call for a global objective on sustainable plastic production retained in Vayas's revised paper, more radical voices may be concerned to see the support for a global target to cap the production of primary plastic polymers reduced to a mere reporting obligation, alongside a vague promise of, quote, further action at a later meeting. Similarly, some developing countries will likely be concerned that the question of whether the new treaty should establish a dedicated multilateral fund under the treaty is left, at least partially, open. But as negotiators sharpen their positions ahead of the Busan talks, the strongest pushback is, as always, expected from Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and a few other oil and gas producers. These countries have, since the beginning of the process, campaigned aggressively for the treaty to be nothing more than a loosely defined framework for the sharing of national policies, akin to the Paris Agreement on climate change, a treaty in name only. There is little reason to believe that they will dial down their stalling tactics in the coming months, although they might find it increasingly difficult to build support for their sabotage. Towards the end of the closed-door meeting in Nairobi, India and China reportedly expressed support for Vayas's plan, suggesting that these countries, widely considered battlegrounds in the negotiations, are in the process of distancing themselves even further from the spoiler group. But as promising as his initiative is, Ambassador Vayas cannot single-handedly circumvent the industry interests that have, with their stalling tactics, plagued these negotiations since the beginning. The plastics treaty talks are, and will be, by all indications, continue to be, a fight between the rulemakers and the spoilers, those working to identify the regulations needed to end plastic pollution, and those working to prevent the adoption of any rules that may harm their domestic industries. Judging from reports coming out of this week's meeting in Nairobi, there are few, if any, signs that this underlying political dynamic is about to change. But Vayas's initiative may just be what the rulemaking majority needs to achieve their goal. His proposals exemplify a kind of multilateral leadership that the plastics negotiations have, so far, sorely lacked. No treaty has ever been successfully drafted without a chair or a group of strategically placed individuals who are willing and able to take control of the text, to consult and make sure that all views are heard, but also to proactively propose and defend solutions against attacks from those who would rather see the negotiations end in failure. Ambitious countries should capitalize on this opportunity, shore up support for Vayas' efforts, and work to make sure that the third iteration of his proposal becomes as strong as possible. Vayas is, with his initiative, setting up a perfect game. But it is up to the progressive majority, especially the leading members of the High Ambition Coalition, to bring the victory home. 1 year ago, at the start of the third round of talks in Nairobi, these countries failed, perhaps out of complacency, to defend the zero-draft treaty prepared by the former chair as a basis for negotiations. Now, under the leadership of Ambassador Vayas, they are offered a chance to correct that mistake.
This was Rebecca Altman reading Magnus Løvold's blog post, A Basic Proposal. Rebecca and I would like to thank Magnus for trusting us with the audio version of his text, as well as Katie Silberman at the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, and Ray Mandel-Miller at the Granoff Recording Studio at Brown University for helping us record this episode. Music is by Dorian Roy, and production is by me. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you love this podcast, please consider supporting it. Go to plastisphere.earth/support to find out more. In the weeks leading up to the final round of plastics treaty negotiations in November, we'll keep you updated with some more content on plastic pollution and politics. So subscribe, stay tuned, and see you soon.